Now, please welcome Associate Director at Cirrus, Mike O'Donnell.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for attending the newest Iowa Technology Summit track, Industry 4.0, sponsored by Cirrus. If you attended this morning's Industry 4.0 session, you may have heard a little bit about Cirrus. The Center for Industrial Research and Service was created to improve the quality of life in Iowa by helping businesses and their communities prosper and grow. To learn more, visit cirrus.iastate.edu. As you're listening to today's panel, feel free to ask any questions you have in the Q&A section. I'm Mike O'Donnell, Associate Director at Cirrus, and I will be moderating this panel. This morning's Industry 4.0 Deep Dive features a great panel of speakers, including Debbie Durham, Director of IEDA and IFA at the state of Iowa, Emily Schmidt, Chief Administrative Officer at Sukup Manufacturing, and Hank Norum, President at Ramco Innovations. Debbie Durham's a longtime economic and community development professional who serves as the director of the Iowa Economic Development Authority and the Iowa Finance Authority. Prior to joining IEDA, Debbie served as president of the Siouxland Chamber of Commerce. Emily Schmidt is the third generation of family active in Sukup Manufacturing, the world's largest family-owned and operated manufacturer of grain storage, drying, and handling equipment and steel buildings. She serves as a Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel for the company. In her role, Emily manages legal, human resources, communications, strategic planning, and other administrative functions of the company. She also promotes Sukup Safety Home as a hurricane-proof structure the company manufactures and has placed more than 300 in Haiti. Hank Norum is the President and CEO of Ramco Innovations, an industrial automation products and services provider located in West Des Moines, Iowa. With a focus on high-tech automation solutions, he has worked to strengthen Ramco's core offerings while expanding high-tech business opportunities through the launch of Maple Ventures. At the heart of the Midwest entrepreneurial ecosystem, Maple Ventures partners with industry-related startups to generate relevant partnerships for Ramco. Hank combines his passion for studying and executing business transactions with his financial expertise to advance technology in Iowa and the Midwest. Let's get started. So I'm going to open it up with a question for all of you. Tell me a little bit about how you define Industry 4.0 and what it means to manufacturing in Iowa.
Give it a shot here. So at Ramco, we work with companies on automation almost every day, and really Industry 4.0 for us is really looking at smart manufacturing, intelligent manufacturing, and leveraging tools to do that. So robotics, sensors, anything to automate a plant floor or a system. The goal here is really to collect data, automate processes so that we can have more intelligent and operational effectiveness going forward for our manufacturers. Ultimately, 4.0 is going to be necessary to be competitive long term. So a lot going on with 4.0, and I'm excited to get going with this panel here.
Well, I've actually had a very unique experience because being able to handle the intellectual property of the company, as well as being able to attend different exhibitions for the industry for capital acquisitions with my husband, who does that for our company, been able to see the advancement of this throughout the 10 years here. And so we've grown and leveraged many different technologies along the way, but we're seeing all the technologies coming to be integrating side by side. So the hardware, the software, and the workers in it interplaying all together now. So that's really how it's coming all full force. And we're really seeing that advancement coming together even faster. And the manufacturers that can integrate those new smart technologies into their facilities to fully automate, not just the processes, but the decision making, that's what's adding value throughout the production life cycle, reduces costs for customers, and ultimately helps to make Iowa manufacturers more competitive. And we use it for preventative maintenance, and just knowing when we should be reviewing those machines just saves time, energy, and reduces downtime.
Yeah, and then I would say for us, this journey, if you will, really began for IEDA in earnest back in 2018 when we launched the Year of Manufacturing. And at that time, you were starting to pick up news stories about the fourth industrial revolution, which was this Industry 4.0, referring to the utilization of technologies that fully automated processes for decision-making processes or decision-making across all product life cycle. No, and while we see these 4.0, digitalization moves across all industry, for Iowa, we're really focused on this manufacturing 4.0 initiative that we'll talk about during this next 50 minutes. And the reason for that is because manufacturing for the state of Iowa is such a large part of our economy. It's now nearly approaching 20% of our GDP. I can also tell you it was very interesting today. I just got off the phone with the International. We have a European office. We have contractors all around the world. We take a very global perspective for growth at IEDA. And the thing that was interesting is they were all saying that, it was all about digital initiatives. And they were also saying how they were lagging in 4.0 initiatives globally. And that was even coming from Germany, which I would consider also a manufacturing powerhouse. So it's good to have the, knowledge and the recognition that I was really leading on this effort.
Thanks all for those opening comments. So Industry 4.0 can be really tough, and we'll certainly get into those challenges as the session goes along. But let's start with hearing examples from each of you. I'd like to hear an example of an Industry 4.0 change that just wowed you and made you realize the level of importance here. And I see Emily smiling, so I'm going to have her kick off with this answer first.
Well, going to the machine exhibitions is a highlight of my year. It is not the main duty of my job, but I love it just as much as I grew up with my father always saying, we can make that. So that was something that is just innate in me. But seeing it built in with the 4.0 part is just been a fruition of something that I grew up with. And so it's more of a natural step for me. But just this year, we doubled our capital expenditures budget because we were investing in rural Iowa. And one of our new machines that we came in with, it's a new panel bender, and it's on a part that's very, very important to get the right and precise angles and done right. And it's also used to be done by an employee who I do reviews with, and he's very adamant about getting it just done right, and it's very hard to do. And so we worked with him, and we brought in a new machine, and what used to be able to take days to finish now takes 1 hour. And he is so happy about that, and he's more proud that we can get it done just correctly and 100% done right. But not only did it make it efficient, but and done much quicker. And when my husband and Steve and the bin sales director were watching the runoff for this machine, they said, well, we're going to have to add extra concrete under the walkway because just how many jaws are dropping from watching this. And it truly is an amazing set of equipment, but employees are happy when they see this working, and to get someone and people that are seeing these type of technology implemented still being impressed by it, that's exciting as well. And employees love seeing that too.
Excellent, thank you. How about you, Debbie?
Yeah, so for me, I think it was actually in the meatpacking industry and the harvesting facilities. We have two new facilities, the pork one in Sioux City and the one in Eagle Grove, and seeing these new facilities that are state of the art and having experience being into the old packing plants, very labor intensive. The thing that really struck me, and then of course during COVID, we saw that, we were euthanizing so much of our livestock because the supply chain had dried up, consumers still were looking for the product. It had to do with people couldn't get to work. And I think if there's an industry that we really need to focus on with these Industry 4.0 principles, it is the food processing industry. And if you think about that, is 24.4% of our manufacturing comprises a manufacturing sector. So for me, I think that's where we have to really start when we think about that, the opportunity there and securing that food supply. And also we see it, I think, in shoring up supply chain. So very exciting opportunities. But let me just also say, though, Mike, that I see this in every manufacturer that I tour today. I mean, things like Emily's saying, and this collaborative work environment where, you know, the frontline employees are the ones saying we can do this better, and how the life and safety on this. You know, you think about just the density of a packing plant, for instance, but so much of the jobs that have been automated really are protection for the employees. And I think that's the part that we miss oftentimes out of this conversation about moving to a more automated workflow.
Thank you. And Hank.
As Debbie mentioned, we see it a lot in the food supply as well. And on the safety side, some folks ask, you know, how does automation apply to safety? You know, and historically it's been, you know, very mechanical, hard guarding. Now there is all sorts of safety applications using and leveraging automation. So it's been very cool to see that and rewarding at the same time because folks feel safer in that environment. Couple wow stories. Most people like beer. We've worked with a brew making manufacturer, and you would not believe how automated the brewing process has become. And once they got started with automation, they couldn't get enough. And so they're automating everything possible, you know, tank level monitoring, remote monitoring, all sorts of sensors across the brew making equipment. So, you know, historically it's been, you know, manufacturing with the smokestacks and, you know, what you think of historically as manufacturers. Now these are high tech environments and very much innovative thinkers. Another wow moment very recently was got approached by a nonprofit company who was looking to automate part of their production. So they're a volunteer entity, not traditional manufacturing, but they work in a sort of production environment. And they said, hey, we'd like to be more inclusive of disabled folks that come in. And could we look at a collaborative robot to do some functionality to help be more inclusive of disabled folks? And, you know, without hesitating, we jumped right in and said, this is a perfect application. You know, we were bummed we hadn't thought about that already. And we're already putting it through proof of concept work to basically work side by side everyone else. And someone that could not normally work in that environment is now very much a part of the process, is the ultimate goal here. So there's going to be some very interesting applications of automation once we get the wheel spinning and the ball going down the court here. So it's an exciting time.
Excellent, thank you. And please remember, make sure you type in your questions that you have for the panelists, and we'll make sure that they get them answered too. So Industry 4.0 can sound overwhelming when you're stepping into it as a business. I want to hear from each of you, what are the ways a business can take their first steps into a modern technology? And I'm going to start with Emily from the business perspective, and then Hank from the integrator perspective, and then Debbie from the state perspective. So Emily, what's a good first step?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that you don't have to do it all at once. Just taking one step at a time and prioritizing where that biggest bang for your buck will be. And there's many different resources here in Iowa that can help you get there. And so creating a roadmap of what types of technologies will help. So doing research, Cirrus is a great we have you, Mike. I've reached out to you before and didn't know what I was looking for necessarily, but just asking what I wanted to get done and reaching out. I think that's one of the biggest things, and benchmarking and reaching out with other manufacturers. I think resources like this, TAI, Association of Business and Industry, other groups of just how do other people get it done, because sometimes you don't know what you necessarily need. So then once you've done that and getting some more information, creating a roadmap of what might help transition your operations forward, and then prioritizing the investment, working with your CFO to make those plans and just getting together as a team. And for ours, one of our biggest investments this year was we just started that. What is our highest volume part that is done? And then we took that and looked at a robot for it, and the ROI on that was very, very fast. So just running a simple report like that can get you the first step.
Yeah, and I would echo what Emily said, really getting educated. And, Iowa is a very nice state. We're the kind state. And the same is true in the manufacturing space as well. There's plenty of business to go around. So reaching out to your peer group, asking how they got started. As Emily mentioned, lots of good service organizations. I'll add a new one in here that our next generation that's coming into the workforce is amazingly innovative, and they're already used to and accustomed to working in this environment. We work with 3 local high schools and their robotics clubs, and it's amazing what they're able to do with very little information. So I would say leverage that next generation. They're used to having a new device in their hand every year. Us older ones, we're not used to it. We have the same calculator for 10 years. They're used to having the new tool each year. So they're going to bring lots of innovation to us. So I would say listen to them as well, and get educated along the way.
And so I'm going to approach this from the public policy point of view, and how as a state do we accelerate the adoption of manufacturing 4.0. So I think to do that, you have to understand our process before we take on an initiative like this. We just launched our report in the fall, the Manufacturing 4.0 report, which is a product of the Iowa Innovation Council. And for those of you unfamiliar with that, I would liken it to Iowa's think tank, which both Emily and Hank serve on. In fact, Hank was co-chair of the manufacturing subgroup. So all these initiatives are all private sector led, and then service providers are identified. Part of what we did is really assess the situation. When you start Taconomy, who's done all of our economic analysis, we did a survey of infrastructure assets that are open to manufacturers, and that's things like tech work facilities, the Quad Cities manufacturing hub that we believe can be replicated across the state. And then, of course, again, another shout out, as Emily said, to Cirrus. Cirrus has been a great partner for us, and they're already doing this Industry 4.0 assessment. So part of the legislation that just passed is we're going to be opening up some small grants to manufacturers, 75 employees and less. There'll be guidelines of what we're going to fund. There'll be a review process to, again, help that step. And it's also very important to keep in mind, and Emily said this so well, this is a one step at a time process. It can be so overwhelming if you look at it as entirety, but we are here to help. And one thing that we're doing from the beginning is that we are requiring anyone that comes in from assistance for this new adoption from IEDA through this new funding source, that Cirrus will do an assessment with them, because we need to make sure that what we're funding actually starts them or launches them or progresses them along this Industry 4.0 journey. So great collaboration and partnership. And again, thanks for the leadership of individuals like Emily and Hank and Kevin with Pella that really played a significant role in bringing forth this document that we're happy to share.
Hey, Mike, I was going to add, from the work that we did that Debbie mentioned, we're also looking at building out a central repository of information. So folks that haven't started down that path, they can take a look and see what others have done, look at the resources that are out there, grant funds available, everything that it would take to get them started, just to kind of give them a little more background than what they might have otherwise. So that came from our research, and it's good feedback.
Excellent, thank you. So now I'm going to transition the discussion a little here. We can't have a manufacturing discussion today without talking about workforce. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how Industry 4.0 will impact both positively and negatively some of our workforce challenges here in Iowa. And Debbie, I'll start with you.
All right, so I think it's important to start with the facts, right? So here's the facts. 23% of our current work hours will be automated by the year 2030. And I actually think that is actually very, very conservative. I think it's going to be escalated, and I think it'll be higher than that. Automation, though, is expected to create an additional 15 million jobs. The third piece of this that I think we have to talk about the facts is Iowa has a population problem, right? We have more jobs than we have opening, which is why I was so pleased when Governor Reynolds said that we're not going to do any more of the subsidized unemployment because we have jobs and we have opportunity. So when you think about this, and Emily also said that this is a gradual thing that's going to happen. These floors are not going to go to full automation over time. It's going to be done on a gradual basis. Now, you take all of that with slow population growth and aging population, with a national statistic that says 10,000 baby boomers a day are exiting the workforce. I mean, I would tell you can't get there from here unless you use automation. Plus, it's just higher efficiency gains that we get. It allows us to be more competitive. And so the thing is, what you're going to see is there's going to be more jobs. They're going to look differently, which is key. What role do then we have as a public policy to make sure that we're not leaving people behind? Well, it's all about workforce development, right? It's all about retraining. And part of this Manufacturing 4.0 initiative talks about that, using the community colleges model and really is strengthening for those, you know, in the weeds a bit, the 260F program, which is all about retraining. We always focus on new job creation. We're going to have to shift that kind of thinking in manufacturers. The answer is not how many new jobs you're going to create, but basically, as we adopt these new technologies and make these investments, huge capital investments in our plants, how do we relook at our training dollars in a more robust way? So I think it is, again, important that we really focus on the facts of this. When people think this is just going to displace workers, that simply is not true.
I'm going to turn it over to Hank and ask that the picture that Hank sent also be posted up here so he can talk to that. Go ahead, Hank.
All right. Yeah, this was shown to us recently at a conference in Iowa, an ABI conference, and Micro made it pretty clear that, you know, what was taught to us several years ago, 40 years ago about working smarter, not harder, is just not true anymore. It's all about working smarter and harder, and the factory floor has changed. So, with that, Debbie has good stories, Emily has good stories. We see it all the time. We see automation where the last thing they want to do is displace employees. They may move them, but not remove them. Most recently, we were presenting a robot, and someone on the floor said, "Well, there goes another job." Management pulled the entire company in the next day and said, I'm hearing rumors that you're worried about losing your jobs to robotics. And he said, just listen to me for a second. He said, we had our first job fair in 50 years last week. We have 50 open positions, and we had 10 people show up to the job fair. So the last thing I would ever think about doing is removing any one of you here. I need absolutely every one of you. And for us to be effective in the future, we need robotics. We have to have automation. We simply, as Debbie said, we don't have enough people to do those jobs. So again, back to the visual, it's working smarter. It's bringing in that automation. It certainly will impact workforce, just not in the way that you think it might. It's not just removing people. It's adjusting jobs. So every day.
And Emily, what are your thoughts there?
Well, first piece of advice for anybody who has not heard from Debbie Durham before, when she starts out with, here's the facts, like lean forward and start listening and taking notes, because there's usually some of my favorite tidbits that follow after that.
I think we might have lost Emily here, so we'll keep going. One of the comments that I have on the workforce side is Industry 4.0 is taking some jobs that are just okay and making them really, really cool. So there's some really neat opportunities coming up, and it looks like we have Emily back, so I'll turn it back to you. Go ahead.
Well, connectivity is also an issue in rural Iowa. So we're also trying to work on that as well. But ironically, when I said lean in and listen after here's the facts, I got cut off. But workforce is an issue with almost every industry in Iowa. But as a large employer in rural Iowa, we've had to be creative. We have an on-site health clinic for all of our employees. And we're also looking at other things that we could provide, like groceries and things like that, because we want to stay in rural Iowa. And recruiting to rural Iowa is tough. So we'll be having to do a lot of things, but we've I think 3 to 4 times grown 3 to 4 times of number of employees since we bought our first robot. And we've also grown 8 times in sales. So in order for us to stay in rural Iowa, we need investment in automation. And it's also an important thing for wage growth too, because when we put a robot in just this past year, these 3 employees, they used to rotate because it was such a monotonous type of a job. So we put the robot in for the monotonous portion of the job, and we're upskilling an employee to be a robot operator. So it's upskilling employees, it's taking out monotonous jobs, keeping large employers in rural Iowa. So all those things are stories that are not being on the front lines of being told on the front lines of newspapers, because it's not a fun story for them to report on, but that's what's actually happening. And Des Moines is growing a ton, but we want to stay here in Sheffield. And it's always going to be something that we've hired 100 people this year, and we want to build another building here in Sheffield, Iowa. But to do that, that's how we're going to have to grow.
Thanks, Emily. I'm going to turn it over to Hank and ask Hank for his input on some of the biggest challenges businesses will see as we transition over into Industry 4.0.
Yeah, I think we've hit on a lot of them, but it really is perception. We have to clear that hurdle, which I think can be done fairly quickly, as folks start to automate a little bit more further in their businesses. Staffing is a huge issue, not just for the labor positions, but also for all the automation positions that, as Debbie mentioned, are coming online. There's going to be a big staffing issue there as well. And the third one is, Emily touched on it, but connectivity is a big deal. So in order to automate, you have to have high-speed connection, you have to have connected facilities, you have to be able to have the right infrastructure set up. So if we can clear those hurdles of perception, staffing, and connectivity, we should be in pretty good shape.
Debbie, I'll turn to you to keep that going on the broadband and the connectivity side. What are some of the challenges from that perspective?
Well, first of all, broadband is absolutely a challenge, which is why Governor Reynolds made it a focus of her legislative agenda. And, our legislator invested $100 million. Plus, we know from the recovery funds coming out of Washington around infrastructure, broadband will be part of that. But it's not just saying, do you have broadband? Do you have access? That's like check the box. Do you have good schools, in my estimation, right? It really is at the speed in which we can move big data and to move into these Industry 4.0 workplaces. And so that's why the governor really called for a minimum 100 up and 100 down speed. And if you look at the way the incentives were worked out, greater incentives are applied to that. So I think that's extremely important. But, one of the other challenges we have is, people are starting to pay attention. They're calling us, they want information. And so I think that is a good sign. And then we, again, have the resources and the partners to help people start their own journey. But because what's going to happen, and we want to be ahead of this, is eventually the OEMs are going to start putting pressure on their supply chain to do this, right? This is going to happen. So how we have addressed that through, again, the great work that these individuals and others did on the Manufacturing 4.0 initiative was that it called for an OEM council, and that OEM is obviously those large manufacturers. And we've got great participation on that will meet quarterly, and they can't even benefit from some of the incentives that we pass, like these small grants. It's not designed for them. But what they can do is push that information out about these resources and this infrastructure and the incentives to their supply chain. And so that to me is what's very exciting. But that's where the next pressure point is going to come, because people are talking about it, but again, real pressure is going to happen. And the companies that do not make this adoption are simply going to be left behind. And so we want to be very proactive in our efforts and get ahead of that.
So following along that, Emily, how do you make sure you're not one of the ones left behind, right? How do you overcome some of those challenges?
And I think we started a little bit before about it, of researching benchmarks, reaching out. And I think Hank touched on it, of like, we're very nice people, but we also don't ask private questions either, which I found one of the biggest advancements of, like, I used to hate networking, and I was very socially awkward about it. I'll be very blatantly honest on that. But then once, just asking about other people's businesses and asking for help of, hey, we're looking into, like, one thing that's a challenge coming up is cybersecurity. Once you're connected with your machines, cybersecurity is an issue. And I need to knock on some wood since I'm saying this out loud, because I feel like something's going to happen now that I said it. But I think we as Iowans forget that we can ask each other's questions. Because in just researching for this report, one thing that we found from Techonomy was that there were two manufacturing plants that had the same type of machine, but one of them hadn't implemented it yet because they just weren't sure how to fully do it. But just down the street, the other company had, and they just didn't ask for help. And so I think part of it is talking with each other, like, even though we are down the street and we're in Iowa, that you don't ask each other's questions too much about each other's business, because that's a private matter. We have to learn that we're all in this together, and it's also okay to have problems, that it's okay to ask other people to show that you don't have everything figured out. And I think, as a leader also, that's a skill that you have to have, but just as a keeping up with the Joneses, but keeping up with manufacturing 4.0, I think one thing that we've learned is you have to admit that, and you have to help others as well, because that's the only way that Iowa will grow, is that if we're all working together. And although it's as simple as something as that really is, we did see that in creating this report, that was happening all too much.
And I know we've touched on this briefly, but Debbie, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ways to break down the financial challenges of Industry 4.0 and some of the different approaches from the policy standpoint? And then I'll turn it to Hank and Emily to talk about kind of the operational side of that too.
Well, let me again start with, you need a plan and you need an assessment. And that's why before at least any of our funding, like on our grant side, is going to be triggered, we're going to require that, because we want to make sure that equipment that's being bought that's very expensive actually is helping on that efficiency and helping to move you along that path. So I always think it is, again, having that plan, having that assessment. Again, I love the networking thing and talking to other industries, and that's why this OEM council will be set up to kind of advise these small manufacturers of how to make this work. The other thing, though, what we did, and I'm very proud of the legislation that passed and our legislators, that we did get the small grant program, a reappropriation of our high quality jobs, which, basically is a pivot, which Emily also serves on our board of directors, of saying we're not going to just give cash to the larger companies. We're really going to take a portion of this and give it to this purposefully, right, deliberately give it to the small and medium-sized manufacturers. The other thing that was done that is a big deal, and we all should be heralding that, is we finally have accelerated depreciation, right? That's not just coupled to the Fed. That's across industry. At one time we were talking about, do we just open this up to projects that are coming before IEDA as part of our, incentives? And, my thing was, no, it needs to be across in the legislature. And I really give Senator Dawson a great deal of credit for that, because he kind of championed that in the Senate. So, and there's more to do. I mean, particularly with supply chain, the one thing we didn't get was income tax parity, treating it like a single factor corporate, because we want to lean down these supply chains. If we've learned anything from COVID, it's that. So we didn't get everything, but it certainly was a great step forward. And so we'll be sending out, the plan is to reach out to every manufacturer of the state, send them the executive summary of the Manufacturing 4.0 with a list of the new incentives that are available that they should be talking to their accountants about. And again, that we want to be that resource of how we can help them on that journey.
So Emily, as you get into the operational finance, one of the challenges, right, is there's risk with some of these newer technologies and the ROI isn't necessarily certain. How do you deal with that from a business perspective?
Well, I think part of it is also recognizing that lots of the costs associated with machines are not being tracked. And that's the downtime, the inefficiencies. And so part of tracking the ROI is to understand what is really going into your investment. And so if you can't capture all of that, that is one thing. But if you can, looking back at what the hours spent on, the maintenance department, fixing machines and researching, and that's where the reaching out to the other businesses increases the success rate of, understanding the maintenance of, not having to do hydraulics on a benders so that you're going to one without, so that you don't have to have as much maintenance. That's something that we've been trying to do more and more of. And so that's the research on it, but it's also something that you have to think of for labor issues too. There's going to be some more financial costs, but then it's going to solve some of your labor costs as well. So factoring that in. But organizations like Cirrus does help with this, and they can help model those things for you because they help other manufacturers set this machines up already so that they can help you with setting your plan up even before you go to buy. So highly recommend reaching out and just asking for that help if you are not familiar with the Manufacturing 4.0 area. There's also different locations that you can go see it, and we're hoping to build more in Iowa. But we as a group traveled and looked at other ones just in Illinois. So you can go see them, but then also just asking your neighbors of manufacturers to go see machines as well, just to get some of that sticker shock off, I think. That's some of it as well.
And Hank, when you're talking finances, right, there's this perception that Industry 4.0 has to be a really expensive, high capital investment for every company. Can you talk about some of kind of the lower cost, lower capital investment changes that you're seeing companies start to make?
Yeah, I mean, really, it doesn't have to be a full scale, factory overhaul, bringing in complete robotic solutions. You can really have just one-off sensing type application or a one-off vision system that might work on inspection. So maybe you have a quality control issue and you can implement a vision system to help detect issues, so that it doesn't have to be full-on large-scale robotics, moving pallets type automation. There's really much more on the lower end that's much more feasible for companies. But there are challenges, for companies, and Emily mentioned it. There is sticker shock sometimes, and it's not always on just the front end. So they say, okay, well this component costs, say, $20,000. Well, there might be another 20 for integration. There might be another 20 for maintenance. So really getting, and Emily touched on it as well, but talk to trusted advisors and that have been down that path and get a good understanding of what they are. There's also some related costs that are going to start to stack up a little bit for companies as well. So not just automation positions will be coming online, but with 4.0, you really want to study the data, study information that's getting kicked off of these machines. So, there might be additional IT roles that need to be brought on. So folks that are studying data integrity, doing data analysis. So not traditional factory type roles are coming online that are adding to the cost of automation. So very comprehensive planning can be needed. Also, as Emily mentioned earlier, you can have pretty quick ROI on some of these. So really just studying, Cirrus has good templates. We're a service provider. We work with companies on providing that ROI just so that they get a good understanding. They've never done it before. So even getting in, quick Cirrus plug here, getting into the in the automation lab there where they can get their hands on the equipment, ask some of those questions, can really help them understand the financial burden longer term. So definitely a challenge, but not one that isn't understandable with just a little bit of information.
And I want to also mention that one of my favorite things is interns. So if you are trying to just get into this, mirror up your year of investment with interns, and you will not be disappointed. I am a flagship for interns, and we went from having 2 to 40 every year. And we created a manufacturing internship program that we get 30 every year. And there's so many great majors for it, but UNI has a tech program. Iowa State University has not just engineering, but AST major there. There's so many different majors that apply to manufacturing 4.0, computer software, quality, etc. But we also have used them for time studies. So these type of investment with machines can also help you even before you are trying to evaluate. You can bring interns, and they love these type of projects. They love the research. They can do the time study of a part going through your factory, and this is their wheelhouse because they do it for their classrooms anyway. And if you want a labor issue, but then interviewing during an interview, you really don't know what you're going to get anyway. So internships are just sort of like a 3-month-long interview too. So I have always supported interns, but this is a perfect opportunity to help you out with installing manufacturing 4.0 too.
Awesome, great comment. Thank you for adding that. So let's start stepping back as we're getting close to wrapping up. Industry 4.0 has lots of possibilities, right? All these great potentials in the future. If you could wave your magic wand and make one of those possibilities come true tomorrow, what would that be? What would be your Industry 4.0 dream? And Emily, I'll start with you.
I would probably be integrating our augmented reality with continuous improvement checks down the line right away, because that's quality checks is one of our things that we want to be known for. We want to be a world-class manufacturer with a mom and pop type of customer service, and augmented reality, I think, is the next step. And I think that, if I could just wave a wand for that, I think that would be the next step. But also for installing, I think that's something that's would be great to have. And I know that it'll make decisions faster out on the floor. I've gone out to the floor and put our products together, and we have great steps on that. But I could definitely see where that would accelerate every process.
Hank, what are your thoughts on that? What's your dream there?
I would say my dream is more mindset related. I think that we can in Iowa compete at a global level. We can be more competitive with automation if we start embracing 4.0. It's going to make us, instead of creating 40 widgets, we're going to create 400. We're going to be more profitable. Our company's going to thrive because of that. So I would really say it's changing the mindset, getting rid of the, that's the way we've always done it mentality, because that's going to get us in trouble longer term. We had a manufacturer that said, I have 80 employees, 40 of them are going to be retiring in the next 4 years. So he has a major concern on his hands, and he's in a rural area where it's going to be tough to find employees. I grew up in rural Iowa, very near and dear to me. I think the last IEDA statistic I saw said that greater than 50% of our manufacturing is generated from rural areas. So this is a real issue. It's not just a buzzword right now with 4.0. It's very real. And you think about it maybe on I'll say the personal side. It's I could mow my lawn, but I could grab a Roomba that does it and mows my lawn for me, and I can spend an extra 30 minutes with my kid. Those are the kind of decisions that need to be made on the plant floor to say, okay, sure, I could hop on the rider mower for a half hour, but what's my opportunity cost here that I have at play? So these are everyday decisions that I think could make us more competitive globally, really.
Excellent. And Debbie?
Well, my example is really not about wishful thinking. I will be, again, adoption of 4.0 principles will simply allow for a more secure and diversified supply chain. And if we learned anything about this past year, that's where we're seeing so many pinch points right now. The thing we have to figure out as policymakers, and I think with the help of Cirrus and other partners, is how do we do a better job of asset mapping that supply chain, right? About what manufacturers could easily adapt and make parts, because we're not getting parts in. I mean, if you look right now, getting containers into Chicago is a problem. And manufacturers are being forced, and I know, Mike, you're getting calls on this every day as we are really being forced to find new supply chains. So manufacturing 4.0 will allow for a more secure and diversified supply chain, which that to me, I think is very significant and a really great value proposition, not only for Iowa, but for the United States.
Excellent, thank you. And so we've got 6 minutes left in this panel. And so I want to open it up to each of you with a question just of what's next. Where are we going from here? Where's Iowa going? What do you see next? And I'll start with Hank there.
I think what's next is just it's really time for some companies to start the journey, for others to continue that journey. One thing I've heard from many of our OEMs is that they would love for their supply chain. Debbie talked about it. They would love for their supply chain to become more automated. They want nothing more than to buy locally. They want to continue supplying the company down the street for parts. So, but they know to do that, they need to get more automated. They can't wait. Their businesses are growing, so they need their supply chain to grow. So really, I think the next step is just to start that journey. The Manufacturing 4.0 report work has some excellent findings and resources. There will be additional learning that comes from that, additional education. As I mentioned, there's going to be a repository, so there should be a lot of available help there for folks that need it. And one of the things that we talked about from the very beginning was just awareness. So one thing we need to do is just continue working on awareness of 4.0. So that starts in this room here, and we continue spreading that. The good folks at TAI are doing their work to spread the awareness as well. So it's going to be an exciting time.
And Debbie, next.
Well, part of, again, in our plan that we're executing is we will be launching this summer a Manufacturing 4.0 new website that basically has all the report data. We'll keep it updated with new data. People can find information on grants and resources, training, etc. But the other thing, and again, gets back to what Hank said, we really have to strengthen the end-to-end communication within this ecosystem and the networking and looking for those opportunities.
And Emily.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on what Debbie was saying, that I think coming off one of Iowa's strengths is our NICE, but then also taking it one step further is working all together. And at the Iowa Innovation Council, we have all the universities around the table working together, and it's not taking my piece of the pie each time. It's how can we be leveraging what we're all doing really well together for the best of the state. And that is something that I would say Iowa does better than other states at. And because of that, we're going to continue growing each other's strengths better and better. And so by, reaching out to one another on how we can help our neighbors and having those discussions, that's going to be really how we get to the next stages. And, if anybody is on this that wants to reach out, like, you can find me on Twitter. I try to have a goal of connecting 2 different network contacts each week. And that is for the same purpose that we're discussing here, is because we all will get better by doing those things. And that's something that, we're going to have to find out. If all of us need all of our supply chains more locally, how do we then find out who are all of our supply chains? So it sounds like just from this panel, that's something that, Debbie, you and I and Cirrus, I think that's a follow-up discussion that we need to have. That sounds like the next discussion that we probably should have.
I agree.
And I'm going to wrap this up going to that supply chain question. We did have one last question come in here. How long are these supply chain interruptions that we're seeing today going to last? I'll open that up to the floor if anybody has their crystal ball.
No, I don't. I'm hoping it's a bubble, but I have to tell you, in certain industries, it's gone on very, longer than I had anticipated. So. I will also tell you, it's interesting because I mentioned earlier that I just had this international call with all of our service providers around the world. And I'm telling you, there will be an acceleration of companies migrating back to the U.S. Because they need to be closer to the supply chain, knowing that, and the constraints that we're having with just, transportation. So you're going to see a really big emphasis on that.
Debbie, I hear that question a lot in the field too. Companies saying, well, they're used to outsourcing. They're saying, well, this isn't working. Who can do this locally?
Mm-hmm.
We know that folks around our state have the equipment to do it. They may not have been as cost effective historically, but they're looking to come back. That's very true.
Yeah, and we just worked with 2 industries just last week because, again, not being able to get containers in to Chicago. Now we've actually found them, I think, a different freight forwarder that had better connections. But, that's not the best solution. The best solution is to tighten up that supply chain. Mm-hmm. And what Emily said, the piece I don't think we have done well to address as a state is how do we do this asset mapping to know what the talents are and matching? And Mike, you and I have had this conversation as Cirrus, right? I mean, and I haven't even really seen a model out there of another state. Michigan kind of started it on the procurement side, but it's cumbersome and it really is just more of a using government, bidding. So we do need, I think that's the next thing we should do as a spinoff. And Jill just joined the room. And so Jill's like nodding her head saying, I know exactly where this is going to go. Right. Guess what our new initiative is.
This was all planned, right, Debbie? We talked about it beforehand.
Yeah. No, it's just simply, these are this is the next step.
Excellent. And we are out of time. So I want to thank Emily, Hank, and Debbie so much for your time and expertise and your insights into Industry 4.0, where it is today, and where things are going. So thank you so much. And I will turn it back to the conference.
Thank you.
And thank you.